This is our second video on how to create a banner or a ribbon. In the previous video, we showed you how to create the vectors needed. And now in this video, we're going to take those vectors. We're going to use the 2-rail sweep option in Aspire and also do some very basic sculpting to create something like you see on the screen. Okay, to get started, we're going to need to open up that set of vectors that we created in the previous tutorial. So we have a fresh new instance of Aspire here, and we are going to open an existing file. If you navigate over to your version 11 tutorials file in the banners and ribbons folder, you'll find banners and ribbons -drawing. So you can click that and we can open that up. Now you'll see there are the vectors in our 2D view that we created in that last video. But before we get started or get too far into this, we're going to need to check our job setup to make sure everything is correct. So let's go over and have a look at that. Now all this information at the top should still be valid and okay because we did draw it to a certain size. But these two bottom sections here we want to take a closer look at. First of all, let's have a look at our modeling resolution. In this section, we can choose how many pixels that we have to render our 3D components with. Currently right now we have 1 million pixels distributed around our job space, but we have the option to go all the way up to very high, which gives us 4 million pixels. This will give us some nice, smooth looking shapes to work with as we create these new components. The next section is our material settings. In here, we can go ahead and select what material we'd like to preview our composite model in. Currently, right now, it's set to Canadian maple. If we drop this down, we have all kinds of other options here. We have other woods, we have other metals, and we also have plastics and stone. At the very top of this, you can go ahead and add in a new texture. So if you have a bespoke texture that you would like to use, you can just navigate over to that using this file navigator, select it and open that up, and that will be the texture that you will use for your 3D view. Just click cancel that. For now, we're just going to make sure that it's set to Canadian maple and we're good. And let's just click OK. Now let's review the vectors that we created. So we have all of these nice drive rails set up. And then we have 4 different completely closed vectors here. And at the bottom we have a few different profiles that we're going to use to create our components using the 2-rail sweep. We may as well get rid of these guidelines. We don't need these anymore. So when hovering over them, we can right click and we can select delete. And then we can do the same with this other one and select delete. Now, as always, we like to organize our file a bit. So let's move all of our vectors onto specific layers so we can tell what we're going to do with them. So for right now, I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'm going to slowly select all of these rails. And then I'm going to box select everything on the bottom here. Then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say move to layer, and we're going to create a brand new layer. And we're going to rename this sweep vectors. And we could choose a color if we wanted to, but we'll leave it as black. We're going to make sure we turn off new layer is visible, and we're going to leave off new layer is active. And we'll click OK. I see that I've missed one of my vectors, so what I can do is I can click that, right click, and again move to layer, and I can choose sweep vectors out of that. And just place that vector on there. Because we've decided to hide that particular layer, then we won't see that vector anymore, but it's been moved to that hidden layer. Now let's go ahead and select all of these, and we're going to right click on those, and we're going to say move to layer, and we're going to create a brand new layer, and this one is going to be called outline. And the same as before, we're going to leave the drawing color as black. We are going to make our new layer so that it's not going to be visible and won't be active. And then we're going to click OK. Now, if we have a look up here in our layers manager, we can drop that down and you'll see that we have our 2 layers that we just created and then the default one that was created when we first started. So let's go ahead and rename that. We're going to right click on that and choose rename, and we're going to call this components. And we're going to off click that. Now you'll see that it's bold, so it's currently our active layer, and I can simply hit the light bulbs here. We can turn on the other two layers that we had before, and then I can go ahead and off click. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually adjust our component tree a bit. So let's go over to our modeling tab, and down here where it says level 1, we're going to select that, right click on it, rename that, and we're going to call that folds. And then press enter. Click. Now that we have that all done, we can start to create the components that are needed to create our finished ribbon. So first of all, we're going to create the component to make up this part of our ribbon. And to do that, we're going to use our 2-rail sweep feature. And to use that, we need to have 2 drive rails. So this rail here and this rail here, and also the cross section that we are going to drive along that rail. So the result will have a high point over here, and it will sweep down slowly to the end point here and give us a nice smooth curve. As I said, we're going to use our 2-rail sweep option. So we're going to select that from our modeling tools. And then we need to select our 2 rails. So holding down our shift key, we can click on both of those rails. We can choose use selection. And you'll see right away that those 2 vectors have been colored red and green. And both have green dots on the end, and that represents the start point of the vector. And each line has arrows on it telling you the direction of flow. If, for example, your arrows are pointing in the wrong direction, you can right click on your vector and choose reverse rail. Now that we have all those set up, we can go ahead and choose our cross section. Now note the little cross section vector beside my pointer. That indicates that I need to choose my cross section. So go ahead and I'll choose that. And you'll see it's bolded up now, that little icon beside my pointer. So that means now I have that selection made. Now over here in my 2-rail sweep dialog, I want to make sure I turn off sweep between spans. I'm not going to scale to an exact height. I'm going to make sure this is a merge component, and I'm going to call this fold 1, and click apply, and then close. Now if we tile our view here from top to bottom, you'll see that in our 2D view, we now have a grayscale representation of the 3D component that we created in our 3D view using the 2-rail sweep. And as you can see, I sweep from the high point of this cross section, and it does a nice job creating a nice smooth transition. So we took that cross section, extruded it between those 2 lines to give me this shape. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to get rid of the extra material that we don't want. Sometimes I'll refer to this process as cookie cutting, or the more technical term is to delete or remove any of the component outside of this vector. So we're going to hold down our shift key and select this vector and this component. And over here, we're going to use the tool that will clear area of selected component outside the selected vector. Click that, and you see that my component is updated in my 3D view, and it's been cookie cutted out to the shape I'd like it to be. And I can look straight down on that, and I'm really happy with that. Now we're going to continue to work through the 2-rail sweeps to create the rest of the folds. So our next fold, we're going to need this vector here and this vector here chosen as drive rails. And you'll see that I've chosen those before I've actually chosen to click on the 2-rail sweep button. But if I do that, all I need to do is just click the use selection and everything will be all right. Go ahead and choose my cross section. Again, make sure that I don't sweep between spans. Make it a merge component, and I'm going to call this fold 2, and I'll click apply. And now we're going to work slowly between all the rest of these folds, and I don't want to go ahead and do my cookie cutting operation right yet until I have all those parts made. Let's have a look at our 3D view just for a second, and you'll see that we have a nice underfold here. It doesn't quite reach the top of this upper fold, and that's exactly what we had planned here in our 2D view, which is great. Now we're just going to click start a new component, and now we can go ahead and create this fold here. So we'll choose this vector, use selection. We'll grab this cross section, call this fold 3, apply. I'll start a new component. Then we'll create this last fold by choosing these last 2 drive rail vectors and this cross section. And we'll call this fold 4. Click apply, and seeing as that's our last fold, we can go ahead and click close. Now right away you're going to see over in our component tree we have all of our 4 folds listed. So I can go ahead and choose those from here if I'd like to and see which ones those are. Now let's go ahead and crop these components down to the shape that we need. So let's choose this vector, holding down my shift key. This component will clear outside that vector, and we'll do the same for all of the rest of these folds. And now you can see in our 3D view what we were trying to achieve using all of these drive rails, closed vectors, and cross sections. If we take a look at that, that looks pretty neat. And I'm really quite happy with that. Now that we have all 4 folds made, we need to go ahead and combine them into 1/2 of our ribbon as one solid component. So to do that, what we're going to do is go over to our component tree, right click on our level, and we are going to insert a new level. And we're going to right click on that new level and we're going to rename it to banner. And press enter to accept that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this tool right here, which is called Create Component from Visible Model. So as soon as we click this, the software will take a look at what we can see in our 3D view, and we call that our composite model, and create a brand new component. And seeing as we have banner selected here, this level, then it will put this new component on that level for us. So here we go. Now for right now, we have 2 different levels and they're both set to add. So we have our original 4 folds, and adding to that is this new banner that we created. So let's just go ahead and hide this folds level, and then we're going to go ahead and minimize that. So all we see is just this one component, and we can turn that up and take a look at it. Perfect. Now, the next thing we're going to do is using our sculpting tools, make this look a little bit smoother. So let's maximize our 3D view, select this component, and go up here and choose our sculpting tools. Now in our sculpting tools, we've got all kinds of different options, but the ones we're going to focus on for this particular tutorial are going to be smoothing, smudging, and the Twiddle view. So with Twiddle view turned on, let me just demonstrate how this works. In my 3D view, I can now hold down my middle button and I can pan around. Or if I don't have a middle button, I can hold down both my left and my right mouse buttons at the same time and I can pan around. And if I have a scroll wheel, I can also use my scroll wheel to zoom in and out. So I can move around my model and position it in the best location for the sculpting that I want to do. Let's have a look at our smoothing option. Now, when I'm smooth this particular ribbon, I'm going to focus on the areas that in the end, I'm actually going to smudge a little bit of material around to give this a little bit of a nicer look. These are kind of at a knife's edge right now, and it's not the best thing to cut on your CNC, nor does it look all that pleasing in the end. And I'm only going to smooth these areas because later on I'm going to run a smoothing pass over the whole full ribbon, and that will soften all of these edges for me at that point. So for now, with the smoothing tool chosen, I can go ahead now and I can adjust the diameter of my tool by using this slider, or in the 3D view I can use my scroll wheel, or I can use my left and right arrows on my keyboard. Using the up and down arrows on my keyboard, I can change the strength, or I can use the slider to change the strength if I'd like to. So for right now, I'm going to set my strength around maybe 8. And this diameter is fine. I'm just going to go ahead and just quickly smooth these edges just a little bit to help me when I come in to do my actual sculpting. Okay, that's really all I'm going to do with that. Maybe this one here just a little bit. And if you use your mouse button and just kind of tap it, you can kind of smooth that a little bit. So now if you make a mistake and you want to undo it, then what you can do is just go up here to your undo function here, and you can just slowly go over those areas that you don't want to have smooth. And that looks really good. Maybe undo a bit of this there too. Perfect. Now let's go to our smudge. Now with the smudging tool, the same rules apply. I can use my scroll wheel to make the diameter bigger and larger. I can do left and right on my keyboard arrow keys, up and down to change my strength, or use the slider to change my strength. And essentially what I want to do is just kind of smudge some material around, just to kind of smooth those out a little bit. So we're going to turn our diameter down to maybe around there, our strength to there somewhere, so that looks pretty good. And that's great. And we're just going to go in and just kind of smudge it very carefully around, just to kind of build it up a little bit, like so. Sometimes it just takes a bit of practice. If you make a mistake, you can use your Control-Z if you notice it right away. Now also, I want to point out these three options here. And these are quite handy when you are actually smoothing or sculpting. I can choose to use normal mode, which is just like using your thumb in clay. It just kind of pushes the clay along and it will pull from where you started, and it might add some as you go along. So it'll kind of raise and lower depending on the material's height that you're under. You can choose raise only, which will only raise material. It won't actually lower it. Or you can choose only lower material. So if I'm going to use raised, I'm going from some high material to some low material. It'll just add material in there, like so. Or if I choose lower only, I can go this way, back up again, and it'll actually only lower it down. If any areas under my brush are raised, it won't touch them at all. And that's really handy to know when you're sculpting something like this. Another thing I want to point out too is that if you happen to have a drawing tablet, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier to kind of do instead of using your mouse. Turn this back to normal again. I'm just going to smudge that just a little bit. See if I can get that shape back again there. And that looks pretty good. I can hold down or go back to Twiddle again, and we can take a look at what that looks like from the side by just turning that up on its edge. And they look pretty good actually in the end. I like that. Cool. Let's look straight back down on that again. Zoom in a little bit, and holding down our two mouse buttons, we can bring it back over to the center. And I'm pretty happy with that right now. That's the extent of the sculpting we're going to do for right this second. Well, actually, I might just undo some of this right here. Somehow I got a little bit crazy there. And then we can just simply just smooth that just a little bit right there, just to get rid of that little bump. There we go, perfect, great. Okay, and we're going to keep that, and then we're going to click OK. And I'm very happy with that in the end. Okay, let's have a look down that again. Let's take a look at our tiled view. Now we need to finish off this ribbon. We have only the left side, but we need the right side as well. So if we select this component, we can go ahead and select from our modeling tab the mirror selected objects. So we're going to flip it about the center of our job. We're going to create a mirrored copy, and then we're going to go ahead and flip horizontally. Then we're going to click close. Now let's have a closer look at our result here. If we unclick all of our components, you're going to see that there's a line through the center. And if we zoom in on that, there's actually a row of pixels there between our two components. So if we press F on our keyboard to zoom back out again, let's see why that's happening. Well, up here in our 2D view, if you remember when we drew these vectors, I actually drew this line just slightly to the right of the center, so that when we did this two-rail sweep, this actual top part of our ribbon would be a little bit too wide, so that when we did this operation, these would actually lay on top of each other, and potentially, or the result that I wanted, was a raised line of pixels through the center of this. And as we saw, that's not the case. Now these are set to add components, so just to be sure that's not the case, we can go ahead and select both of these by holding down the Shift key, right click, and we can change the combine mode to merge. And you see that when that is completed, then this is still a problem area. So let's go ahead and fix that. And the best way that we can do to fix that is going to be to look straight down on our components. And from our 2D view, we can choose this left-hand side of our ribbon, and we can use our cursor keys to nudge that component over to the right one step. Now, as you can see in the 3D view, that step is quite a lot. It does fix our problem, but that was quite a big step, and our ribbon is now a lot shorter than what it was to begin with. So let's move that back to where it was. If I hold down my control key while I do that arrow press, then I get a much smaller step, and you'll see that the result is much smaller. Now, to make sure this is still symmetrical, I'm going to do the same to the other side of the ribbon by holding down the control key and pressing my left arrow. And now the ribbon is at least symmetrically the same, and I'm ready to go on to my next operation. Now, I want to point out that one of the great things about this method of creating ribbons is that we still have all the folds that we created with these vectors. So if something is wrong, these folds still line up with our original construction vectors, which is a great little fail-safe in case something goes terribly wrong. Now for our last step, we need to go ahead and run a smoothing pass over this whole entire ribbon. So to do that, we need to make one component out of these two parts. So holding down our Shift key, we can choose both of those, and we're going to choose to bake those together. And baking those together, we'll take those two components and create one from that. And there we have it. Now let's go ahead and run our smoothing pass over top of everything. So let's click Apply Smoothing. And we can go ahead and just dynamically choose where we'd like this, how much smoothing we want. We can have all kinds of smoothing all the way to the top end, or we could choose somewhere in the middle or just slightly less than middle. And that looks really good. Maybe right in the middle is probably going to be perfect. That looks great. I'm really happy with that. We get a nice consistent smoothing all around all of our edges. Now, if you wanted that to be a bit more organic, you could take the result of this and do a bit of creative sculpting and make it look a little more rough. But I'm okay with that, so I'm going to click OK. And I'm happy with that result. Let's go ahead now and maximize that. 3D view. We may as well look at our view with the shadow shading on. That gives us a nice idea of how this ribbon is going to look in the end. The last thing we should probably do now that we're happy with the way this banner looks is we should choose this component, right click on it, and we'll rename that to banner. Perfect. Now, if we wanted to, we could take this banner and we could right click on it and we could export it as a 3D clip file. And we could save that off into our clip art library to use in later projects if we wanted to. Now that we're all done, let's just go up and choose File, Save As, and we're going to save this as Banners and Ribbons, and we're going to call this Modeling. And then we can go ahead and click Save. If you're really interested in how we designed this and seeing how other ribbons are designed, there's lots of different variations that are included in your Ribbons and Banners free clip art pack that comes with your software. You can either import in the standalone model from the clip art tab, or you can open up the CRV 3D file for them and you can see exactly how they were created.